You ever get one of those letters that tries to be polite, but you can feel the smug dripping off it like honey? That's how all this started. A glossy envelope with a gold embossed tree logo, and inside, a message that basically said, "Hey neighbor, we've decided that your whole existence doesn't match our aesthetic, so we need you to move." Only it was wrapped up in corporate jargon and sweetly veiled passive aggression. I live out on what used to be the old North Creek Ranch, been in my family for over a century. 300 acres of rolling hills, a patch of forest, and a little creek that hums when the wind's just right. My grandfather built the house himself. My dad was born upstairs, and I was riding horses before I could read. So, when the fine folks over at Cedar Falls HOA decided that my land was, and I quote, no longer compatible with the evolving residential character of the area, let's just say, I wasn't thrilled. At first, I thought it was a prank. Their offer? A laughable $210,000 for 300 acres of prime land, water rights, structures, and legacy. That wasn't an offer, that was an insult. But what really got to me wasn't the amount, it was the tone. The assumption that they were doing me a favor by trying to wipe out a century of family history for their yoga studio and pickleball courts. Enter Meredith Kinley, HOA president. Picture a woman who treats a minor flowerbed mistake like a national emergency. A woman who's got a personalized notepad just for reporting neighborhood infractions. I knew her type the second I saw her: snow white Range Rover, $300 yoga pants, and a smile so sharp it could slice through steel. She leaned over my gate like she was trying to give me the "I already know you're going to be difficult" speech. She said, "Mr. Wyatt, I'm sure your ranch holds sentimental value, but our community thrives on cohesion and order. Frankly, a livestock operation doesn't fit into the Cedar Falls vision." Then she dropped their final offer. I didn't even blink. I just said, "Ma'am, I've got cows smarter than that number." I saw her smile twitch. That little crack? That was my first clue that Meredith wasn't used to being told no. And so it began. At first, it was the small stuff. Complaints about the cows, who were on the opposite side of the property, by the way, reports of excessive noise. Turns out it was my wind chimes, and a citation for visual dissonance because wildflowers were growing along the fence line. Apparently, Indian paintbrush doesn't match the HOA's approved mulch color scheme. I started keeping track of everything. Every complaint, every letter, every veiled threat. Call it a habit. I like my evidence tight and time-stamped. What Meredith didn't know was that I wasn't just some stubborn rancher clinging to land. I was a man with a filing cabinet full of history and an impeccable memory. Then one afternoon, I caught a surveyor on my land. He looked nervous as hell. Said Meredith had hired him to investigate a boundary dispute. I asked if he knew he was standing on private property. He turned bright red, packed up, and bolted. I made a note of it. Every move she made, I was logging. Because I had a feeling Meredith wasn't just after the view, she wanted the land. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my grandfather was more than just a cattleman. He was a land shark. And one night, as I was going through some of his old files, I found something that made my blood run cold: a lease agreement. It was a thick, leather-bound contract with a development company called Northwood Estates LLC, dating back to the 80s. I started reading, and my heart nearly stopped. Turns out, before Cedar Falls was ever a glimmer in some developer's eye, my grandfather had leased a chunk of our southern land, almost 80 acres, to Northwood Estates for a 99-year term. And the lease? Crystal clear. The Caldwell family, that's us, retained ownership of the land. The development company, and, by extension, the residents of Cedar Falls, were tenants. Those paved streets, those cookie-cutter houses, and those perfectly matched mailboxes. They were sitting on our land. And the lease? It had some strict rules. Rules about respecting the property. Rules against harassment. Clauses about nuisance and interference. Penalties for hostile actions. Suddenly, Meredith's little complaints weren't just petty. They were legally actionable. So, I called my old friend Genevieve Talcott, a retired real estate attorney who spends her time cleaning up zoning disasters. I handed her the lease. She read it over, let out a low whistle, and said, "Wyatt, she's standing on a trap and doesn't even know it." For the next 2 weeks, we built a case. Not to sue, at least not yet, but to set up the perfect reveal. You only get one shot at this, and I wanted it to hit hard. Meanwhile, Meredith kept pushing. She sent another letter with their final offer, now bumped to $320,000, and warned that legal proceedings or code enforcement might be next. Translation: we'll sue you or make your life miserable. That's when I decided it was time. The HOA called a special meeting. Residents only. They had their fancy community center, the lodge, which looked more like a bank lobby than anything else. Genevieve and I strolled in, fashionably late, just in time to hear Meredith ranting about how unreasonable landowners like me were and how the HOA might need to take more drastic action. I stood up, tipped my hat, and said, "Funny you mention remedies, Miss Kinley. I think we've got a few of our own." The room went dead quiet. Genevieve handed out copies of the lease. We explained calmly, and legally, that Cedar Falls was built on land still owned by the Caldwell Trust, and that Meredith's actions were in direct violation of the lease terms. One resident, a teacher I think, stood up and asked, "Wait, does that mean you can evict us?" Genevieve didn't miss a beat. The trust has no intention of displacing anyone. But the HOA's actions have put your entire community in legal jeopardy. That needs to change. And change it did. Meredith resigned 3 days later. The HOA issued a formal apology and asked to sit down to renegotiate terms. I didn't ask for the world, just a little respect. In the end, we updated the lease, added an annual ground rent redirected into a fund for local agriculture and ranching education. Cedar Falls got to keep their pickleball courts, and I got peace of mind. Now, I sit on the HOA board, not as a voting member, just as an advisor. They even replaced the wildflowers I lost along the fence with a new plot, bigger than the last one. Funny how fast the tone changes when the soil beneath your feet suddenly belongs to someone else. So that's how I went from the guy they tried to squeeze out, to the guy who holds their lease. Not out of spite, just out of principle. I didn't want their homes, their lawns, or their beige conformity. I just wanted them to understand, some things are too deeply rooted to be bulldozed for convenience. And hey, have you ever had someone with a little bit of power go way too far? HOA presidents, managers, office folk, anyone with a clipboard and a crown? Drop your story in the comments. I've got coffee and I'm all ears. If you liked this little tale of quiet revenge and legal karma, hit that like button and subscribe for more. And maybe check your property line while you're at it, you never know what might be lurking.